Around 1158 BC, a king walked into Babylon and stole the law. Not the metaphor, the actual law. A black stone column nearly 7.5 feet tall, carved with the most famous code ever written, Hammurabi's stele. He took it off its temple pedestal, loaded it onto a cart, and hauled it 250 miles east, into the buried capital of an empire with no chapter in your school books. His name was Shutruk-Nahhunte. The empire was Elam, and history has spent 3,000 years trying to forget it ever existed. So who was the empire that walked into Babylon and took the law home? And why did the great civilizations of antiquity, one after another, spend 2,000 years trying to wipe this people from the record? And how, after every one of those empires had turned to dust, did this same nameless civilization quietly become the foundation of the empire that finally conquered the known world? The land where it all happened has a different name now. We call it Iran. Their story begins on a flat brown plain between two rivers in the corner of the world where the Persian Gulf meets the Zagros Mountains. The land is called Khuzestan now. In the summer, it bakes past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. In the winter, the rivers swell with snow melt from the eastern peaks and turn the dust into thick black mud. There were villages here in the 7th millennium BC, almost 4,000 years before the first pyramid was raised in Egypt. By 4200 BC, those villages had become a city. The city was Susa. By the standards of the ancient world, it should never have happened where it did. It sat almost 150 miles from any major river of Mesopotamia, on the wrong side of a mountain range, exposed to raids from the highlands and to armies from the lowlands. And yet it grew. It buried 2,000 of its dead in a single necropolis on the Acropolis Hill. It traded painted pottery in geometric black on cream, mountain goats and cranes, the clay still in the Louvre. And the merchants of Susa carried goods that came from much further than that. Lapis lazuli arrived in their markets from the mountains of what is now Afghanistan. Tin passed through the city on its way west, into the foundries of the Sumerians, who would melt it with copper into the bronze that defined the age. Susa stood at the eastern terminal of a trade web that ran from the Aegean to the edge of the Indus, and it was the only city of its size that did. By 3200 BC, something happened in Susa that had only happened 5 other times in the history of our species. The people of the plain invented writing. They did it on their own, with no model from anywhere else. We call it Proto-Elamite. About 1,600 clay tablets survive, recovered from sites that stretch nearly 1,000 miles east, all the way to a city on the edge of the Iranian desert. The tablets are real. The signs are real. The grammar, the words, the names, none of them have ever been read. After more than 4,000 years, in archives in Tehran and Paris and Philadelphia, the writing of Susa stays silent. We know it tracks something: sheep, grain, men, debts. We have learned about 1,000 of its signs. We do not know what they are saying. Even the tongue these people spoke is a stranger to the rest of the world. Linguists have placed Sumerian and the Indo-European languages, the Semitic languages, the Dravidian languages, every major ancient mouth, into one family tree or another. Elamite has no branch to attach to. It is a complete linguistic isolate, with no relatives in any tongue anyone has ever recorded. Whatever it was, it came from somewhere alone. But Elam met its enemy long before the world wrote down its name. Around 2650 BC, on a clay tablet copied and recopied for 1,000 years, a Sumerian scribe records the boast of his king. The king is Enmebaragisi, the lord of the city of Kish, and the line reads, "He carried away as spoils the weapons of the land of Elam." It is the oldest sentence we possess about a war between two named peoples. 2,500 years before Christ, the historical record opens with an act of violence against this place. The first war anyone troubled to write down was a war against the Elamites. It would not be the last. 3 centuries later, the man who built the world's first true empire turns east. Sargon of Akkad pushes his armies from the Mediterranean down into the Persian Gulf. He claims to have ruled from sea to sea. The cities of the plain bend the knee. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, sits down with the king of Awan, the highland power of the Elamites, and signs the oldest international treaty that has come down to us with an Elamite signature on it. The Akkadians believe they have closed the eastern frontier. They are wrong. By one chronology, around 2100 BC, by another more than a century earlier, a man named Kutik-in-Shushinak rises in Awan. He is the last king of his line. He does something none of his predecessors managed. He unites Susa with the highland kingdom of Anshan, about 300 miles to the southeast, and rules them as a single state. He commissions inscriptions in Akkadian, the language of his old conquerors. In early Elamite cuneiform, the language he spoke, and in a third script of his own people, made by his own scribes, never seen on a stone before, and that no one would read for almost 4,000 years. There is a lion of carved limestone in the Louvre today, the size of a man's shoulder, with his name on it in 2 of those 3 writings. The third script is the one we will come back to. Remember it. Then Akkad falls. Famine, raids, internal collapse. The empire that had crushed Elam comes apart in a single generation. And from the eastern mountains, a new dynasty pours west. Around 2004 BC, the army of Kindatu of Simashki marches on the city of Ur, the last gleaming capital of the Sumerians. Ur falls. Kindatu drags its king, Ibisin, off to the highlands in chains. And there he dies. The Sumerian world ends in chains, in a foreign court. The plain is even. The men who came to wipe out Elam are dust. The men of Elam are alive, in their own land, with their own gods, and now with the head of Sumer hanging on their wall. The next empire would not just attack them. It would carve laws into stone, harder than any spoken before, and then Elam would steal them. For nearly 4 centuries, the kings of Elam call themselves something strange. Not king, Sukkalmah, the Grand Regent. They pretend to be governors of an empire that does not exist anymore, and under that pretense, they trade and marry and intrigue their way across the whole of the Near East. What they build has no parallel. 3 crowns at once: the Grand Regent in Susa, his brother in the Eastern Highlands, and a nephew below them, training for the throne when his elders die. No empire of the ancient world organizes itself this way. It works for 400 years. The most powerful of these grand regents is a man named Siwe-Pala Kupak, and he writes letters to Hammurabi himself, and the king of Babylon writes back. The dynasty does not conquer. It quietly holds the spine of trade between Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau, and every other power has to come to it. In the 1700s BC, Hammurabi crushes an Elamite coalition, drives the Elamite governors out of his northern flank, and turns his city into the new center of Mesopotamian gravity. He writes his code on a stone column nearly 7.5 feet tall. The whole region reads it, copies it, fears it. Elam, for the first time in 500 years, falls quiet in the records, or so the records say. Sometime in the 1300s BC, a king named Untash-Napirisha climbs his ziggurat for the first time. He has built it himself in the middle of the Khuzestan plain, an hour's ride southeast of Susa. He calls his new city Dur-Untash. We call it Chogha Zanbil. It is the largest ziggurat ever raised outside Mesopotamia, and it is still there, baking in the same sun, the same mud brick courses you can put your hand on today. Untash-Napirisha planned more than a single shrine on the ground around it. He laid out 22 temples, one for each of the gods of his country, brought together for the first time on a single sacred plain. In Shushinak, lord of Susa, the bull god, judge of the dead, patron of kingship. Napirisha, the great god of the highland kings of Anshan. Kiririsha, the great mother. And the rest of the pantheon of Elam set down in one place, ringed by walls of glazed brick, the color of the sky after rain. He would manage to finish 13 of those temples before he died. It is the most ambitious religious project anywhere in the Bronze Age world, outside of Egypt. He marries the daughter of the king of Babylon. His wife is Napir-Asu, and her bronze portrait, headless, almost 2 tons of cast metal, sits in Paris in the Louvre. She is one of the largest bronze castings of the ancient Near East. Her name is on the hem of her dress. Then comes the moment Elam takes its revenge in stone. Around 1158 BC, Shutruk-Nahhunte, king of Elam, marches on Babylon and takes it. His campaign sweeps through the Babylonian heartland, Babylon itself, Sipar-Eshnunna. He stays only long enough to take things. He takes the stele of Hammurabi off the temple pedestal in Sipar, just north of Babylon. He takes the victory stele of Naram-Sin, 400 years older than that, the one carved by Sargon's grandson. He takes statues of older Akkadian kings. He hauls all of it back to Susa, 250 miles east, across the same plain where Sargon's armies once marched. And on the side of every single trophy, he carves his own inscription. Over the work of master Akkadian sculptors, in his own language, to his own god, in Shushinak. He is signing other men's monuments like a thief writing on stolen art. His son, Kutir-Nahhunte, goes back for the prize Shutruk left behind. He takes the statue of Marduk himself, the patron god of Babylon, out of his temple and hauls him east into Susa as a trophy. The Babylonians never forgive that. Shutruk's other son, Shilhak-in-Shushinak, takes the throne next, and under his hand, the empire of Elam reaches the largest borders it will ever know. He campaigns against Babylon, against the cities of the Middle Tigris, against every neighbor that stands in his way. He carves more building inscriptions than any other Elamite king who ever lived. 300 of them survive. He raises the standard of Elam from the Zagros Mountains all the way to the Tigris, and for the first time in history, this country sees its writ run over the cities of Mesopotamia rather than the other way around. Then he dies, and what he built begins to come apart in months. Then, around 1100 BC, a Babylonian king named Nebuchadnezzar, not the famous one, the first one, does what no one had tried. He marches on Elam in the open summer, in heat that pushes well past 120 degrees, when no army travels. The Elamites, who never expected a campaign in that season, lose the field. He recovers his god. He turns for home. The empire that took Hammurabi's stele falls quiet and disappears from the written record for almost 3.5 centuries. But the silence is an ambush. When Elam returns to the records, the world has changed. The old Babylon of Hammurabi is gone. In its place, a new machine stretches from the Mediterranean to the Tigris, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Iron weapons, standing armies, siege engines, mass deportation. The Assyrians have industrialized warfare in a way no one before them ever did, and they have decided they want the East. They will spend the next 40 years trying to take it. And the campaign that opens that war is the strangest one anyone has ever fought against this country. Around 694 BC, Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, decides to bypass the Zagros Mountains entirely. He builds a fleet inland on the upper Tigris in cities that have never seen the sea. He drags Phoenician shipwrights east to lay the keels. The ships are launched and sailed down the river to the Gulf around the marshes, across the open water of the Persian coast. They land Assyrian marines on the shore of Elam. It is the first amphibious invasion in human history that we have words for. No one had ever attacked Elam from the water before. It was the side of the country that should have been impossible to threaten. Sennacherib threatens it. He still does not break them. 3 years later, in the summer of 691 BC, the largest pitched battle of the ancient world up to that point is fought at a place called Halule on the Tigris. Elam stands beside Babylon. Both sides field armies that no king before them could have raised. The chronicles of one side say the day cost the enemy more dead than any war they had fought. The chronicles of the other side say nothing was decided. The truth is probably both. Halule grinds both armies down, and it ends without a clear victor, which in this war is the same thing as Elam surviving. What we know about that day comes from both sides at once. Elamite archers in coarse linen tunics, with leather quivers and composite bows, arrayed beside Babylonian heavy infantry. Across the river, Assyrian chariots, 3 men to a car, iron axles, the king himself in the center. Mud after a wet spring on the Tigris, men in armor going down into mud. And in the lines of the coalition, somewhere alongside the Elamite host, the chronicles list Chaldeans, Medes, and Persians, almost certainly the first time an Assyrian army faced what would, in another century, become the empire that swallowed them. The Babylonian Chronicle gives a number for the Assyrian dead. The Assyrian Chronicle gives a number for the Babylonian dead. Both numbers are impossible. Both numbers are also probably close to what really happened. Then, in 653 BC, a generation later, on the bank of a small river in the eastern marshlands, the Elamite king Teumman makes his last stand. The river is called the Ulai. The Assyrians, now under their cruelest king, Ashurbanipal, break the Elamite line. Teumman tries to escape with his son. The Assyrians catch them. They kill both. They cut off the king's head, haul it to Nineveh, and hang it on a tree in the royal garden, where Ashurbanipal lies on his couch and feasts beneath it with his queen. The scene is carved into the wall of his palace. You can see it in the British Museum. You can see Teumman's mouth open in surprise. Scholars sometimes call this relief the first political meme in the history of the world. It was carved on a wall to be walked past by every visitor, by every diplomat, by every prisoner. A still image meant to make every other ruler in the Near East look at that tree on the wall and remember what the consequences of crossing Assyria looked like. And yet the head on the tree is only a prelude. The end comes 14 years later. In 639 BC, Ashurbanipal returns to Elam himself. He does not come to win, he comes to erase. His army moves through the country temple by temple. They strip the gold off the gods. They drag the bones of Elamite kings out of the royal tombs at Susa and scatter them. a particular curse for a people who held that the dead must rest in their proper place. They chisel out the inscriptions, the sacred writing of the kings, from every monument they find. They sow the fields with salt and a poison plant called silu, so that the soil itself will not feed another generation. Ashurbanipal has it written into his own annals. For a distance of a month and 25 days' journey, I devastated the provinces of Elam. Salt and silu I scattered over them. The dust of Susa, of Madaktu, of Haltamash, and the rest of the cities I gathered together and took to Assyria. The noise of people, the tread of cattle and sheep, the glad shouts of rejoicing, I banished from its fields. Wild asses, gazelles, and all the beasts of the plain I caused to lie down among them, as if at home. 3,000 years of civilization, 3 writing systems, the first known war in history, the patron god of Susa, the dynasty that took Hammurabi's stele, silent. By the standards of the only people writing things down, Elam is over. The record closes. That is what the records say. The records were Assyrian, and Assyria was about to find out what it meant to be a civilization that the survivors got to describe. 19 years after Ashurbanipal's death, in 612 BC, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, the Medes coming, in part, out of the same eastern mountains the Assyrians had spent centuries terrorizing, surrounds Nineveh. The walls of the most feared city in the world come down. The palace where Teumman's head had been hung is burned to ash. The cuneiform libraries are buried under their own ceiling beams. Assyria does not recover. There will be no Assyrian Empire. There will be no Assyrian state. The people who claimed to have erased Elam are gone within a single generation of the man who wrote it down. Susa, meanwhile, is still inhabited. In the same year, Ashurbanipal sacks the city. A small king up in the highlands sends his son with tribute to Nineveh. The king's name is Cyrus, the first Cyrus. He rules a city called Anshan, the same Anshan that was the southern half of Elam, the one Kutik in Shushinak had united with Susa 1,500 years earlier. The Assyrians treat him as a vassal. He is an inconvenience. A century later, his grandson, the second Cyrus, the one we now call Cyrus the Great, walks into Babylon at the head of an army and ends the Babylonian Empire. On a clay cylinder, less than a foot long, he tells the world who he is. He calls himself King of the Universe, son of Cambyses, the great king, king of Anshan, grandson of Cyrus, the great king, king of Anshan, great-grandson of Tespes, the great king, king of Anshan. 4 times, not once does he call himself king of Persia. The largest archive of Elamite language tablets ever discovered, between 15 and 18,000 of them, was found not in Susa, but in Persepolis. The ceremonial heart of what we call the Persian Empire was administered day to day in the language of the empire Ashurbanipal had said would never be heard again. Darius the Great, the king who put the Persian Empire together as a working machine, built his winter capital at Susa, not at Persepolis, not at Ecbatana, at Susa. He raised an audience hall of 36 stone columns on the same Acropolis where the painted pottery of the first city had been buried 4,000 years before. He carved a road from his Mediterranean coast all the way back to that audience hall, almost 1,600 miles of paved track between Sardis and Susa, with way stations every 15 miles where royal couriers changed horses. The Greeks, when they wanted to talk to a Persian king, came to Susa. The Athenian general Themistocles, exiled from his own city after the wars he had won for it, walked across the empire on Darius's road and pleaded his case before the King of Kings, by then Darius's grandson Artaxerxes, in that same hall, drinking wine in a palace that overlooked the same plain Hammurabi's stele had once been hauled across. And on a cliff face in the Zagros, more than 200 feet above the road below, Darius cut the longest royal inscription of the ancient world. 3 columns, 3 scripts, 3 languages. Old Persian, the speech of his own people. Akkadian, the speech of Babylon. And Elamite, the 3rd script, the language of the city under his throne. The Elamite column was carved first and given the central place on the wall. The voice the records had said would never be heard again was the voice the new empire chose to publish itself in. Today, Chogha Zanbil still stands. The bricks Untash-Napirisha, laid in the 1300s BC, are still in their courses. UNESCO has given it a number. Tour buses leave from Avaz. The stele of Hammurabi sits in Paris, in the Louvre, with a small label that says it was found in Susa. In 2022, 4,000 years after Kutik in Shushinak chose to commission inscriptions in his own private script, a French archaeologist named François Dessay stood up at a conference and read them. The script was linear Elamite, 72 signs. The voice that Ashurbanipal said no one would hear again can be heard. The older writing of Susa, the Proto-Elamite that was already 1,000 years old when linear Elamite was new, remains one of the last unread scripts left on Earth. What the first scribes of the plain were trying to tell us, no one alive has ever found out. The land where all of this happened still has the same valleys, the same heat, the same black rivers. The maps now print over them a different name: Iran. They sat across the road every empire of Mesopotamia needed, and they refused to be governed by anyone but themselves. That was the offense that took 2,000 years to repay. They were named by their enemies. They were buried by their conquerors. They were forgotten by historians. And when the empires that erased them finally fell, Elam was already inside the foundation of what came next. Maybe what we call ending is just another word for becoming something else.